Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the fifth session of the Unboxing the SDGs for People, Planet, Prosperity, Peace, and Partnership speaker series. This series is presented in partnership with the SDGs in the Classroom Community of Practice at York University. I would like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Tkaronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speakers, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Jose Echeverry. Dr. Jose Echeverry is an associate professor in the Faculty of Environmental Studies. He is co-chair of the Sustainable Energy Initiative, SEI. His work is focused on developing practical policy solutions to climate change through collaborative efforts, particularly in strategies to develop all renewable energy sources to their full potential, and in finding new ways to communicate effectively about solutions to climate change and energy problems. Currently, Dr. Echeverry is working to address the climate change crisis by developing, locally and internationally, an ecosystem of innovation focused on providing new practical opportunities for those interested in designing and implementing paradigm-shifting climate change solutions parks using work-integrated learning approaches. Dr. Echeverry, thank you very much for moderating today's session. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Francesco, Ali, Carolyn, Sandra. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you. We are about to start something very interesting with some colleagues that are joining us from right here at York University. And it is my pleasure to talk a little bit about CFAL York. For those of you that don't know CFAL York is an affiliate, a satellite, if you will, of the United Nations Institute of Training and Research. And York University decided to become a member of UNITAR, particularly to advance our goals on the Sustainable Development Goals. Our academic plan at York University focuses, among other things, in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. And the two speakers that we have right now are doing that from an interdisciplinary perspective, which I think you'll enjoy a great deal hearing from. So I don't want to steal their thunder. And to make this a little more fun, I'm going to start with my colleague, Dr. Sandra Peniston. And I'm going to ask her to introduce herself, not how I was introduced with rank and work and that kind of thing, but instead with a reflection on how your accomplishments as an academic, as a professor, have led you to want to focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. And the idea is to personalize what we do. I think we have to care more about nature and about each other, and learning how people got motivated to do the work that they're doing. It's very, very important. So I'm not the speaker, I'm just the moderator. So Dr. Peniston, if I can call you Sandra, could you tell us your story, please?
Sure. So thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I will just preface my answer by saying I've had the opportunity to work in African settings for about 15 years. And I've seen the impact or the importance of nursing in these really rural, under-resourced areas. And so I really, when the Sustainable Development Goals came into play in 2015, I could see the impact of needing these goals achieved by 2030 in these African settings. And also, once I got into understanding the SDGs, I saw the impact just as greatly in our local settings. And so when I thought about from the perspective of nursing, I really wanted to change the courses that I teach to really reflect the 17 SDGs, and for nurses to see that the nursing profession is more than at the bedside. I call it nursing beyond the bedside, to understand the global impact that nurses can have beyond just that person-to-person interaction that a lot of people see nurses in the traditional role. And so from there, I can jumpstart my presentation, and it'll go into a little bit more of answering that question for you. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, so my presentation is called Integrating the SDGs into Nursing Education and Empowering Nurses as Catalysts for Change. So as you know, my name is Sandra Peniston. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Nursing at York University here, so within the Faculty of Health. So I'm going to just briefly go over the SDGs, and not in detail, but more so how they link to healthcare and the nursing profession, the importance of expanding the role of nurses beyond the bedside care, and then a case study of my course called The Global Context of Nursing. So again, I'm not going to go into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals other than you know that they've been set by the United Nations, a set of goals to meet certain targets for 2030. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has really thrown a wrench into meeting these goals. And so post-pandemic, countries are coming back together now to realign and try and get themselves back on track for meeting these goals by 2030. But if we think of the relevance to healthcare, all the goals have a direct or indirect impact on health and well-being. And for most people, you may think specifically about SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, and SDG 13, climate action as the key ones that are related to health. But really, every single one of them has either, as I've said, a direct or an indirect impact on health and well-being. The evolving role of the nurse. So this role has really changed. And we had the original traditional role of bedside care and patient management, and the role was really just those direct clinical responsibilities to that patient and family. But nursing has really evolved into leadership within public health initiatives, advocacy and policy influence, and community education and engagement. And I'm going to just briefly expand on these expanded roles. Nurses are taking on significant leadership roles in healthcare organizations. The last hospital that I worked at, the CEO was a nurse, and most organizations now in hospitals, nurses are leading either in the VP role or the CEO roles in these hospitals. They're really influencing health policy and decision-making. Advocacy has always been a key part of nursing, so championing health equity and justice, and we saw the health inequities during COVID-19. So nurses were at the forefront of really advocating for that inequity. Always engaging in public health campaigns and collaborating with other sectors and stakeholders, and thinking about health in all perspective, where any sector needs to think about how their sector impacts health. And so nurses have been a key role of collaborating with sectors and other stakeholders. Community health, so conducting health assessments and screenings, providing health education and resources, and then education, training and mentoring this future generation of nurses to really see the value and understanding that they are global citizens and that health is more than just that direct patient care. And then patient health educative initiatives are always ongoing. So in 2020, the World Health Assembly, which is the governing body for the World Health Organization, officially designated 2020 as the year of the nurse and the midwife to really think about advancing nurses and midwives, their position in transforming healthcare globally. And what came of it is this designation really highlighted nurses' critical role, and it drew attention to their role in health systems globally, and that they make up more than 50% of the health workforce in many countries. It addressed the global shortage of nurses, and in 2020, the WHO, the World Health Organization, estimated that there was a global shortfall of about 9 million nurses in 2020. The designation also was an ambitious effort to achieve universal health coverage. So the WHO has a goal that regardless of where you live in the world, that you will have universal health coverage, a basic type of universal health coverage by 2030. And they recognize that the only way that they're going to meet this goal is through nursing. And lastly, the designation was to elevate the nursing status and investment in nurses, because in many countries they're undervalued. And it was really aimed at raising that nursing status globally and promoting more investment in the nursing workforce. And as I've said earlier, I've had the opportunity to work in rural northern Ghana villages for about 12 years now, and I'm currently working through the University of Edinburgh on a study called the Cohort Study. And it's looking at high blood pressure, which is the #1 killer across Africa. But in rural communities who have no access to care, it's really detrimental. And so I've been interviewing primary healthcare providers, and the only providers in these rural areas are nurses. There are no physicians. And so you really see the value of nurses in providing healthcare. And we see this, we don't have to go to rural regions in Africa to see this. We see this in our rural regions in Canada, in Ontario. And so really showcasing the value of nurses in healthcare. Along with the designation of Year of the Nurse came the State of the World's Nursing Report, and was the first ever report looking at nursing around the world. And the executive summary showed that the central role, or really highlighted the central role of nurses in achieving universal health coverage and the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, highlighting that across the health sector, approximately 59% of the health sector are nurses. Now, this was all great until COVID-19 hit, and the impact on nurses was significant. They were absolutely indispensable during the COVID-19 pandemic, playing a crucial role in patient care and really the overall healthcare response. They were on the front lines, providing essential medical care, comfort, and support to patients, but also their responsibilities extended way beyond their routine care to providing critical care to patients without physician support, supporting families because families weren't allowed to be at the bedside while their family and loved ones were dying. And they worked very long, challenging hours. But they were constantly quickly adapting to protocols and infection control changes to make sure that the virus wasn't spreading. And they were instrumental in getting the vaccines out to vaccinate. And they were educating the public about health measures, and really their dedication and resilience really highlighted their role as nurses and underscored the need for greater investment in nursing education and training and resources. And so a lot of studies came out around COVID-19 and the nurses' involvement. And I was involved in writing a piece at the beginning of the pandemic. We did this qualitative interviews with nursing students and faculty who were precepting students on the front lines, just to get the perspective of the challenges and recommendations moving forward. And what we found was that the nursing students working at the front line were overcome by fear and anxiety. There was impact on their learning environments, but the resilience that they had, these intrinsic and extrinsic factors that influenced their perseverance, and they provided recommendations on how to deal with future pandemics. And then the faculty narratives looked at the importance of preparatory work and the psychological and physical manifestations of supporting students on the front lines when they couldn't be there themselves, and just the overwhelming resilience of students and faculty. And so this led to a report that was given to the Faculty of Health here at York University to prepare for future pandemics. And so a lot of research started to come out during COVID about nursing and the Sustainable Development Goals. This was a review of articles looking at nursing and sustainable development goals, and that we really need to focus on the nursing curricula, and we need to revise our training to include SDG content and develop this global nursing workforce comprised of global citizens. We needed innovative and disruptive nursing research, really showcasing how nurses are helping achieve SDGs, that nursing practice had to operate within a nursing framework, and that we needed nursing policy development that really could foresee how to achieve the SDGs. And so the findings from this review said that when the urgency of COVID-19 response subsides, the world will adjust to the new normal, and nursing must be positioned to lead and contribute to the different levels towards achieving the SDGs. And from this original review came many, many articles showcasing nurses achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, the importance of nurses and curriculum, and that we needed Sustainable Development Goals into the nursing curriculum. A lot of research came from COVID-19 and moving forward. And in Canada, there was the reinstatement of the Chief Nursing Officer in Canada by the federal government, recognizing that the immense contributions that nurses made through COVID-19, but also continue to make every day. And so the government of Canada launched the reinstatement of the Chief Nursing Officer in 2022 to recognize that nurses need to be at the table when discussions are being had about healthcare systems and healthcare delivery. And so I want to end by just showcasing my course, Nursing 4546, the Global Context of Nursing. And this is a course in the fourth year of a four-year undergraduate Bachelor of Nursing Science program. It's a required course. And one of the first lectures that we discussed the Sustainable Development Goals in one of the first lectures. And I ask nurses to think about which of the SDGs are relevant to nursing. And 9 times out of 10, they choose just SDG 3, good health and well-being. But while we discuss, the premise of the first lecture is really to set the stage that the SDG number 3 does not live in isolation, and that for individuals to be healthy, they have many influences on them from social, environmental, economic factors, and that meeting SDG 3 does not result in good health, and that we need to consider all the other SDGs as well. And so that's the premise of my first class, is having nursing students understand that it's all 17 SDGs. And so I'm going to showcase just about 3 or 4 assignments. The first assignment that I do with my students, or I have students complete, is the Think Global, Act Local assignment, because oftentimes students will think that these are all global challenges outside of my world, and that it's really important to set the stage right away, is that students need this global perspective to understand this transnational health issues, and that in order to address them, we need to address them not globally, but also at the local level. And so it's really important about facilitating their learning to be a global citizen and to make those connections between local issues within their own community and the broader global health issues. So that's one of the first assignments. The second assignment is a pair paper where they work together in a pair to look at a global health challenge that relates to one of the SDGs. And so they need to discuss the global health challenge, how it's been dealt with both locally and globally, how it can relate or be incorporated into meeting one of the SDGs, and then a discussion of why it's important for global health and nursing. From this paper, I have students submit a story submission to an organization called the Nightingale Initiative for Global Health. And it's almost like submitting a letter to the editor. They submit an 1,000-word story based on their paper. And again, it's just a summarized version of their paper, but it's to be written in first person, and it's to interest a general audience rather than just a nursing audience. And so a lot of these papers have been published. And so it's been a great opportunity for, they've really enjoyed this opportunity to write this short story. And then lastly, I host a global collaborative symposium, which is called Nurses Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And we set it up as a conference where student groups will present on a health issue, about a health issue in their local community, or it could be in the broader health system, depending on what their choice is. And again, they have the opportunity to explore an SDGs by looking at a global health issue. And then again, bringing it back to those nurse-initiated strategies. Like, what are those things that nurses can do to promote this, or to tackle this global health issue, and in turn achieve the SDG? So that's just the last assignment. And before I leave, I want to showcase a curricular champion video that I was involved in producing. So for those of you on the call who may not be aware, there is a 3-year grant, which Carolyn and I are currently co-leading, called the SDGs in the Classroom Curricular Innovation Fund. And part of it is the development of an interdisciplinary toolkit, which you can find on York University's website. And part of that toolkit was having experts, faculty experts, that are actually infusing the SDGs into their classroom and provide a case study of how they're doing that. So I'm just going to end with showing this short 4-minute video on my curricular champion video. So let me just give me a second to toggle to that. Our planet and humanity are living in fragile and uncertain times. Many folks continue to face difficult challenges for themselves, their communities, and their families. We need to look no further than our own doorsteps to realize these challenges. My name is Sandra Peniston, and I am an assistant professor in the School of Nursing. I incubate the next generation of sustainable development change agents with the skills, knowledge, and mindsets that face the complex challenges articulated by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. When nursing students enter my 4th year global health class, they immediately think of SDG 3, good health and well-being. In our classroom, I emphasize that health depends on a variety of factors, both inherent within individuals, as well as those influenced by social, environmental, and economic factors. Thus, students learn that meeting SDG 3 alone does not necessarily result in health. Students take away from our classroom an understanding that the Sustainable Development Goals are connected, and action in one area will influence outcomes in other areas. And for sustainable development to succeed, economic, social justice, and environmental challenges must be addressed together and not in isolation. In our classroom, I invite students to change their mindset in 2 ways. To begin with, I ask them to consider the global challenges as they relate to their own local communities, or as I say, their own doorstep. For students to grasp the SDGs, they must understand each individual, each community, and each nation face all the SDGs in varying degrees. I believe this promotes global learning and global citizenship, as it is important for students to see the connections between global issues and their own local communities. Secondly, I endeavor to cultivate a systems thinking perspective by focusing on the fact that the SDGs are inclusive and interdependent, and that efforts to achieve one SDG will always intersect with efforts towards achieving other SDGs. In our classroom, I invite students to challenge their mindsets through a mock UN SDG conference titled A Voice to Lead, Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Student groups comprised of 5 members are responsible for exploring an SDG by examining a current local or global health challenge connected to an SDG, and investigating nurse-initiated strategies for promoting health
and thereby helping to achieve the SDG. At the mock UN SDG conference, students present a mini oral poster presentation. This presentation allows students to demonstrate their knowledge of a local global health issue and to present a summary of their research and to discuss their work with other students. Students gain a deeper understanding of the SDGs and how they are not just occurring in what are commonly called developing countries or the global south. Moreover, these SDGs are truly a global challenge happening in their own local communities. Student involvement and understanding of the SDGs and their relevance to the nursing discipline and their future lives are enhanced by this assignment. Nurses, as the primary providers of healthcare to all communities in all settings, are key to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. To increase the likelihood of success of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I believe it is my role and responsibility as an educator to teach today's students, who are tomorrow's decision makers, to think critically and ethically about our global challenges and to apply systems thinking approaches to serious and complex societal problems. It is a privilege to have our role as educators to teach and to learn from students, and we all should be embedding action and activism in our teaching to meet the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. So I don't think we're taking questions. I think we're waiting to the end to take questions.
Yes, Sandra, and I'm going to address everybody by their first names. And the way we're going to do it, it was explained in the chat box. We will leave the end of today's time to address questions from the audience. What I will do is plant a little seed into each of the speakers for them to think about when we come back as a plenary. And to me, listening to your excellent presentation, Dr. Peniston, what I got out of it was, the Sustainable Development Goal #1 is ending poverty and addressing universal health care using the systems approach that you mentioned, that includes your activities, your teaching work on teaching nurses about the Sustainable Development Goals. It's an incredibly good way to address a number of societal problems that are embedded within the Sustainable Development Goals. But I want to step back a little bit to mention that we have an international audience right now, including some friends from Africa. And one of the things when we're talking about healthcare is that Canada is a very quote unquote special place in the sense that we have public healthcare. Where I come from, it's private healthcare mostly. And there is still public healthcare, but it is much less effective, shall we say, than the private healthcare system. Not because public healthcare is worse, but because the approach that society has decided in that specific part of the world to go with an emphasis on private delivery, which favors, of course, those that have money. So it's not very conducive to addressing poverty, which is a Sustainable Development Goal #1. So I made that reflection to plant the seed in both of our speakers from the perspective of budgeting. How can we budget within your areas of expertise, in your case, Dr. Peniston, nursing, to ensure that money can be used to address the Sustainable Development Goals? And this would go both in the public and private healthcare systems for different reasons. But at the end of the day, the public sector wants to be cost effective, grossly speaking, or overgeneralizing perhaps. And the private sector wants to be profitable. And in both counts, reducing expenses makes more cost effectiveness and more profitability in the private sector. So the point of the story is, how can we address the needs of the public sector, preventive illness, remediating illness, using a sustainable development goals approach that actually harnesses the budgets of the healthcare system, whether it's private, like in some countries, or public, or a hybrid, to ensure that budgets can be used to address, the sustainable development goals, and specifically enhancing universal healthcare. So it's a complicated question, but it's one that is incredibly important, because when we use voluntary approaches to address things, they don't get addressed. And when we actually put budget to address them, then they actually get paid attention by the people that have to do the budgets, and the people that review them, and the people that ensure that progress is being made. So I wanted to put that into perspective, not to answer now, Dr. Peniston, but for you to think about budgetary approaches in healthcare that allow us to solve the sustainable development goals, or at least address them. And as a way to connect with my next esteemed speaker, Dr. Steele, in both counts, in Dr. Peniston's practice and in Dr. Steele's practice, education is paramount. And our next speaker, Carolyn Steele, will be talking about how she has embedded equity, diversity, and social justice into the curriculum of a humanities class. And it's going to be a very interesting presentation. Dr. Steele, before you present your PowerPoint, if you don't mind, for the audience, to speak a little bit about your own personal journey on the Sustainable Development Goals, sustainability, so we can actually understand where you're coming from as a human being. That would be a welcome introduction, if that's okay with you.
As a child and a teenager, I spent all my summers up in the Canadian North canoe tripping and camping. So for much of my life, my connection to the natural world of Canada was very deep, very intrinsic to who I am. Then as I started my own journey, understanding the colonial past of Canada and its integration with our Indigenous people and the Indigenous connection to the land, this deepened even further. When I became a professor, I heard about the SDGs, and that started me on my own personal journey on what role do I have as a citizen, as an individual, in addressing and making the world as good a place as I possibly can within the scope of what I'm able to do. So that was my personal journey. And for the last few years, I've been now stretching that into my professional journey in the classroom, which is what today's talk will take a look at.
Thank you so much for that personalization of your work. You're an accomplished and esteemed colleague, and we're all eager to hear about your current and future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I teach in the humanities at York University, and York, as you can tell just by who's in the room today, is very committed to the SDGs. This is an integral part of the university academic plan. Faculty at York are encouraged to think about which of the SDGs are incorporated in their courses, their teaching, their research. It's on our funding applications, on how we report, and even marketing. So it's something that's very intrinsic to being a teacher at York University. However, it's harder for some faculty, like myself, to figure out how it is that my discipline and my courses intersect with the SDGs. So I, as I said, teach in the humanities, and specifically an area of the humanities called the Digital Humanities. Now, what does the humanities include? This is something a lot of folks struggle with. So they have a vague understanding about what the humanities are, but not a clear understanding of what that actually means. So at York University, there's a whole faculty with a range of courses that are identified as humanities-based courses. And you can see these are quite diverse, and they cover a lot of different fields. One of those departments is called the humanities, and that's the one that I teach in. Within the humanities, there are 11 programs, again, a broad range, and this gives you an idea of the flavor of the kinds of programs that are in that program. A little bit more focused, but again, very broad reaching. So I find that a lot of students and a lot of faculty either outside the humanities aren't clear about what the humanities are, and inside the humanities are not clear about where the intersections are between their discipline and the SDGs. The danger of this, and the unfortunate piece of that, is it leads to students and faculty thinking that the humanities are simply irrelevant to the SDGs, or worse, reinforces that notion that the humanities are a largely colonial, outdated, and frankly irrelevant field of study. But if you think about it, the humanities are in fact the study of the human, what it means to be human. And as so much of the SDGs are linked to human activity, I would argue that the humanities in its own way has a very core role to play in the SDGs. But why is it then so few faculty members in the humanities have taken this up? Well, one is an issue of nomenclature. The languaging of the 17 SDGs seems to fall outside of what a lot of humanities faculty would see as being relevant to their field of study. We might see something in the area of quality education, maybe some equity stuff, reducing inequalities, possibly some peace and justice. But then when you move into the goals in those areas, they seem to be far removed from what happens in a discipline. This is why I was very pleased to see that People, Planet, Prosperity, Peace, and Partnership, the 5 Ps, became a way of clustering the SDGs at a macro level themes. And these macro level themes have a great deal of relevancy across the university curriculum, not only in the humanities. So I was very pleased in there, because for the first time, once I started hearing about the 5 Ps, I started seeing, okay, this is a way that I can start finding my way to integrating SDGs into the classroom. Whoops, go back one. I ran into a few problems when I started seeing how the SDGs and the PPPs integrated together, however. So we have poverty and hunger, global health and well-being, quality education, equity, gender equity, and water and sanitation. So the ending of poverty, hunger, ensure dignity and quality in a healthy environment. Yes, but that sounds a little bit like what Sandra was talking about, or what social workers do. Is this really what the humanities does? Well, I kept on exploring, because I thought, there's got to be a natural way into this. I didn't want me integrating SDG content like bacon bits in a salad. I wanted to make sure that it was integral to what it was that we were teaching the humanities. So I was delighted when I finally found the recommendation on education, and this is a mouthful, for peace and human rights, international understanding, cooperation, fundamental freedoms, global citizenship, and sustainable development. Short form being recommendation on education, peace, human rights, and sustainability, and even shorter, and that's how I'll refer to it in this talk, as the recommendations. This is something coming out of UNESCO that focuses on how educational institutions can address the SDGs more explicitly into their curriculum. Within the book, they've structured the recommendations on SDG 4, quality education, ensuring inclusive, equitable, quality education, and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Great, that makes sense. But again, isn't that what the Faculty of Education does? How does that fit here? Well, then they dug down to 4.7. And I have to admit myself, I didn't really focus on 4.7. In fact, I may have missed it when I was going through the FDGs, because 4.1 to 6 all focused on access and equity to education, making sure women can get into education, make sure children have access to education. Very important topics, but not the humanities per se. But then 4.7 says, by 2030, ensure all learners acquire knowledge, skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development, sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equity, promotion of culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation for cultural diversity and the culture's contribution to sustainable development. Finally, with this, I had my way in. Incidentally, this, for any of you who are in the process of reporting on how your institutions or organizations are addressing the SDGs, following the recommendations does give you does embody 4.7 as a legal foundation for the SDGs on education. So for reporting purposes, addressing the recommendations would be an excellent way of doing this. Not only does, as part of what they do within the recommendations, they provide a range of learning objectives. So those of you who are developing curriculum or developing courses and you're wondering, how am I going to integrate? Well, the learning outcomes in the recommendations related to quality education fit into almost every curriculum. You would be hard put not finding a cluster of these that wouldn't apply to your courses, your programming. They also provide a range of guiding principles, 14 of them, again, in various combinations. Most of these would apply to greater and lesser degree to almost every program in most universities. And then finally, the UNESCO General Conference developed a list of competencies that melds quite easily with the guiding principles and the learning outcomes that provide a range of concrete specific skills that students can learn when they are addressing the SDGs. So now we have learning outcomes, we have guiding principles, and we have competencies that hit that breadth, but specificity enough that almost every program within a university, whether it's a health-based program, a law-based program, or a liberal arts program, like in my case, will find some way into the SDGs using these tools. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how that played out in my case. I teach a course called Digital Culture in the Humanities. It's a third-year survey course that takes a look at the way digital technologies have impacted the study and practice of the humanities. And after taking a look at the learning outcomes, the guiding principles, and the competencies, I went into sections of my course that I was already doing one way. I thought, you know what, with a little bit of tweaking, I could really make a difference here relative to the SDGs. So the first place I started was a section where we're looking at libraries. Well, libraries, as you know, are organized according to metadata. I knew about metadata in libraries. I was less familiar with metadata from a colonial perspective. So I went to the librarians at York University, two in particular, and I explained what I was trying to do. And I invited them in to talk. First of all, these, not librarians, equity advisors brought them into the course to talk about ways in which equity is realized at York. Now, at York, rather than using EDI, we use DEDI, decolonization, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I brought them into the classroom to talk about DEDI and how it applies to libraries, the structure of libraries, or the relevancy of them in the libraries. And part of that included access to a DEDI glossary and access to the DEDI toolkit. These became tools that students used for the rest of the course when they're analyzing and producing work in the digital humanities. In another class, this is where we brought in librarians to talk about how online museums could be analyzed, could be critiqued, could be structured through a DEDI lens. Whose perspective do they offer? Do they offer different perspectives for different users? How is expertise framed within these places? So students are taught how to evaluate institutions of public pedagogy through DEDI lenses. And again, I turn to the library to talk about this, and the Center for Human Rights, Equity, and Diversity, because although I'm an expert in my field, I wasn't an expert in DEDI, and I wasn't necessarily an expert in decolonizing metadata. And I think this is really important, that as professors, we have a tendency to want to stay within our comfort zone of what we know, what we did our grad studies in. This is what I'm an expert in. But you're working in a university that is full of experts, and calling on those experts can be very useful. Finally, this culminated in a Wikidata edit-a-thon, in which students were taught how Wikimedia records are constructed. They learned to critique them through a DEDI lens. And then we spent several hours going through and adding the names, the works, and the information of Indigenous cultural producers, namely filmmakers and authors, into the DEDI media universe. So this is the same data that is used in Google's, I forget the name, but Google's version of Siri, when you call up and ask for questions that might have to do with, can you name authors in Canada? What are some of the famous authors in Canada? Can you list what are some of the most innovative filmmakers in Canada? Well, there's a good chance now that when you ask that, you'll hear the names of some Indigenous creators, because these students learned how to enter the records of the metadata of these creators into that archive. Now, this process was guided by an Indigenous librarian. So in the process, they learned also about the ethics around being a non-Indigenous person, providing information about an Indigenous person. What are the lines in the sand? What are the best practices? What should you avoid doing? So they were trained on how to do that. And many of the students came out of that. It was hard work. They worked really hard on it, but they came out of it feeling, you know what, for the first time, I feel like I've done something real. Going back through the guiding principles, this exercise, the starred ones, are the principles that informed collectively these three classes. These are the outcomes that were realized through these three classes. And these are the competencies that the students strengthened or learned from scratch in these three exercises. So what are the takeaways from this? Well, first of all, as I said, you don't need to be the sole source of expertise in your classroom. If you don't know something, bring in a subject matter expert. This does two things. First of all, it exposes students to expertise other than your particular academic expertise, because expertise comes in many different shapes and forms, including lived experience. It also raises their awareness of the kinds of expertise that is on campus, the kinds of support that's on campus, the services that are out there. And before each speaker spoke, I asked them to talk a little bit like how Jose did today about their own paths. How did you get here? And in that way, it's also a way of students understanding that there are career paths related to the SDGs just by virtue of the expertise of the people coming in to talk to class. I also learned that I didn't have to start from scratch, that a lot of what I was doing in my class already intersected with the SDGs through the outcomes listed in the recommendations, through the guiding principles of the recommendations, and through the competencies listed through UNESCO. So if you're looking at, do I have to do something brand new that I've never done before? Or can I do what I've been doing and just tweaking them, amping it up a little bit? Finding your way in is almost harder than once you get in there, as Sandra was saying, you'll see how the connections between the SDGs plays out. They don't happen in isolation, but having that starting place can make a difference. And at the end of the day, students want to know that their education, their investment of time and energy and money is going to enable them to make a difference in the world, to have meaningful lives. So I just want to finish now with a quote from the recommendations. Learners of all ages and throughout life must be empowered with the knowledge, skills, values, attitudes, and behaviors needed to take individual and collective action towards achieving this common future. This is what is at the core of the SDGs, at the 5 Ps. This is at the core of the recommendations. And ultimately, it's at the core of what it is that we do in the university. So the idea that my discipline doesn't really connect to the SDGs, what I teach isn't related to the SDGs. If you start with 4.7 as a starting point, I think you'll find it's a hop, skip, and jump before you realize that you're fully informing your students on how what they're learning is related to making this world a more sustainable place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That was very, very encouraging, because when you get into this conversation approach strategy of addressing the sustainable development goals, it can be a steep learning curve. And I really appreciate your honesty, your candor about how you navigate yourself. These, it can be a path that it's difficult to get to the top, and then you get to the top of the mountain. The analogy is that you're in a mountain chain. There's many other mountains to be climbed. And hence my question that I posed earlier. We're going to open it up for questions if people have. I already mentioned, please put them in the chat box in case we run out of time. But the point of the story here is budgets, right? I asked that question earlier about budgetary decision making, because at the end of the day, by 2030, we need to either have addressed a lot of the sustainable development goals, or at the very least, have a group of people worldwide that are addressing them. And that's where UNITAR CFAL comes in with these type of interventions, talks, courses. We're trying to create a group of people worldwide that will be qualified to address the sustainable development goals. And not the time to get into micro certificates and that kind of thing, but budgets are important. As I said earlier, if you have a voluntary approach, you end with less than if you have an approach that is funded. So I'm going to open it up for the question about funding in the public-private sector, in medicine, nursing, for Sandra. And Carolyn, you touch on how we operationalize the money, but where the money could come or should come, or how much should it be. I'll let you think about that. Sandra, I don't know if you want to go there, but this is the opportunity to talk budgetary. I call it Sustainable Development Goal 18, by the way, which is sustainable finance to make things happen. So over to you, Sandra, some thoughts about the budgetary questions.
Okay. I won't take away too much time, but I think 2 main points for me would be, we need to stop working in silos. We've talked about the interconnectedness of the SDGs. We need to have a budget that frames the SDGs as a whole, because what we're doing in education is going to impact health. So we need health and education to be at the same table. It needs to be all interconnected in one interdisciplinary, interconnected budget. So that is key. We need to get rid of the silos and be working together on one solid budget for all the SDGs together, because they interconnect. So saving money by not working in silos. And the other part is we need to go back and look at the upstream approaches, where we're too focused on the downstream, like goal number 1. Number 2 is hunger. The food banks, we need to stop. We need to back ourselves upstream and stop putting all that money into food banks and back up and see what can we do upstream. So those are my two things. Don't work in silos and get back to the upstream and collaboratively look at the SDGs from an upstream intercollaborative framework.
I agree with you. And Caroline, your chance. Tell us your thoughts.
I think for me, it's a matter not working in silos, absolutely. And so part of that is to share what you learn. And that doesn't have to cost anything. So open educational resources are a prime way most libraries are addressing this. eCampus Ontario, and there's similar kinds of organizations all over the world, becomes an archive where you can upload material that anyone can access at any time. Sandra and I put in a funding application to have the SDGs and the curriculum project funded. But one of the things that came out of that, as she mentioned, was the SDG toolkit, which provides resources and inspiration on how to integrate the SDGs across the curriculum. That's free. Anyone can access it at any time just by following the link or just linking York University's SDG toolkit. And you've got access to an award-winning range of tools. And again, that's happening all over the place. So I think that sharing, this isn't where people are out to make a dollar. This is people trying to share, inspire, collaborate, and learn from each other.
Much appreciated, Caroline. Sandra, I agree with both your statements. And we're about to introduce Dr. Ali Askari, the director of CFAL York, to say some concluding comments. I'm going to answer the question that I posed myself, because in Canada, it's very important to acknowledge that we have a carbon market and carbon pricing mechanisms. This got created, it got rendered valid by the Supreme Court of Canada, and it's a gigantic pot of money that it's supposed to be going to address the climate emergency through the use of renewable energy, energy efficiency, etc. I mentioned that particularly for our colleagues in Africa and Latin America, because we need to be able to make such markets accessible worldwide. Inside of Canada, we're having a dilemma amongst politicians that continue to debate the importance of this, whether it's important or not. Not the time to discuss it, but just wanted to point out to the worldwide audience we have right now that we do have a carbon market in Canada. It's operational, and it's intended to address things like the climate emergency and do things like local capacity development, which Sandra and Caroline have explained very clearly how it can be done from different perspectives, whether it's from the humanities, from nursing, from medicine. Public healthcare systems in Canada exist for a reason. And to be continued that conversation, we left a lot of hanging things, but that's the purpose of today. It's to provoke some thoughts into your mind. And because we're running out of time, make sure that if you have a question, put it in the chat box with your email so we can get back to you on this. But now is the time when I'm a little bit behind to introduce my esteemed colleague, Dr. Ali Askari. Ali, some concluding thoughts on today's workshop.
Thank you very much. First of all, I really want to thank Sandra and Caroline for making such great presentations and providing us with your experience on working on SDG, implementing them in your courses, which is exactly in line with the goals of this speaker series. When we started working together, putting this title for the SDG speaker series, our goal was to really go into some of the details and specific implementation aspects of SDGs in teaching, training, etc. And by unboxing, we really want to understand how these details can be achieved. Some of the problems that we currently have is achieving SDGs in part relates to perhaps either lack of understanding or not having deep understanding of the complexities, and as Jose mentioned about some of the operational aspects of the implementation related to budget, etc., which are really important. That is where we understand the difficulty of achieving these goals. But nevertheless, we see promising works, including your works, that are helping students and others to better understand how SDG implementation in different fields, whether it's in equity, diversity, inclusion, or in nursing education works. And also want to thank you, Jose, for moderating this session. So nice. And with that, I also want to extend my thanks to all the participants for being with us today. Looking forward to have you in the next session that is coming in 2 weeks' time from now. And that's it. I think we are off time.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Have a nice rest of your day and a good week ahead. I thank everybody that participated, and particularly to our esteemed speakers. Let's keep up the good work, and see you on the next one. Dr. Ascari, Sandra, Caroline, and participants, Francesco, thank you for helping us with the infrastructure requirements. And have a grand day, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.